Hey guys, Mr. Klein here again. We're going to be talking about religion and the Reformation today. And so this is going to be another presentation talking about what was happening at this time. Okay, so let's just hop right into it and let's talk about how do we get to the Reformation and what that means. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the Catholic Church. So we're going to talk about Catholicism. All right, Catholicism was the main form of Christianity before the Reformation. There wasn't really a whole lot of other ones. You had the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is more Eastern Europe and Russia, that area. But the main form of Christianity in Europe at the time was Catholicism or Catholic. Okay, so that's what that was. So you think about the Pope and cardinals and priests, that's what Catholicism is. So during the Middle Ages, we've kind of talked briefly about the Middle Ages, what was going on during that time. A lot of people were very religious during this time. The Catholic Church became very powerful because of this. People went to church all the time. People were going to Mass almost every day. Their whole lives revolved around church because the thing was that your life sucks now, but if you do all the things that you're supposed to do, then your reward will be in the afterlife. And so that's kind of everyone's mindset. People were living very harsh lives in the Middle Ages. We talk about the serfdom and feudalism, all those kind of things. So this reward at the end was a lot. So a lot of people were devout towards their religion. So Middle Ages was powerful. We've also mentioned before about the Crusades. We kind of talked about that in our Middle Ages presentation. If you don't remember the Crusades, you can go back, watch that one, or you go to our website, watch the quick hitter of the Crusades, get an idea what was going on there. So just a brief overview. Remember, it's where European Christians start to invade the Middle East, start to take over Jerusalem. This made the Catholic Church very powerful because kings and nobles were pumping tons and tons and tons of money into the Catholic Church. And we all know that with money and power, sometimes we get some people that are kind of corrupt with those kind of things. So a lot of people that were up high in the Catholic Church were using these things to get themselves further in life. So they're becoming very rich and those kind of things. Not everyone was doing that. There were most of them. I hope one day that whenever I do one of these videos, the bell doesn't ring. I hope that really happens. But the Catholic Church becoming way too more powerful, started to see some corruption happening there. The big corrupt thing that really sparks the Reformation is this thing called indulgences. Okay, so let's talk about what indulgences are real quick. Indulgences were given out by the Catholic Church to say, if you pay for these many things, we'll give you an indulgence to absolve your sins and give you a free pass into heaven. So everyone that was wealthy were paying a lot of money to get these indulgences. And if they did something bad, then they can go back and say, hey, I did something bad. Catholic Church says, you know what? Pay for this indulgence and we will give you your chance to get back into heaven. So these indulgences made the church even more rich than what was happening then. So this idea of indulgences sparks the idea of the Reformation. Okay, and we'll talk about how that happens on our next slide. So here comes this dude right here named Martin Luther. So this guy is a pretty interesting character. So he is the start of the Protestant Reformation. Okay, we'll talk about that on our next slide. But let's talk about who Martin Luther was as a person. So before Martin Luther became a big part of the Reformation, he was in law school. He wasn't a very devout person. He wasn't very, very religious. He went to church when he was supposed to, those kind of things, but he wasn't in it all the time. Then all of a sudden he's out having a big old good time, partying with people. It's late at night. He's walking home and a huge storm comes through the town. And he starts freaking out and he prays and says, God, if you get me through this storm, this lightning storm that's crazy, I promise you I'll drop everything I do and I'll become a devout Catholic. And so he survived the storm and he kept his word and he becomes a Catholic monk. So he starts to follow those practices, becomes a monk, going through that life there. What happens if you talk about what I said previously about indulgences, that starts happening at St. Peter's Basilica, which is in Italy, okay, in Rome. That's kind of where the Pope kind of hangs out and lives, okay. He gets wind. He's there. He's hanging out. He's being a monk. He's doing all those things, attending the church and those monasteries out there. He gets wind of these indulgences, and he's like, "This is wrong. There's no way we should be able to do these things. We're making people pay to get into heaven. We should be doing those things. We should be showing them the pathway to do that." Okay. So Luther is upset about these indulgences. So what he does is he one night decides, you know what? I'm going to write down all my complaints about the Catholic Church. I'm done. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. We're going to deal with these things here. So he writes these things called the 95 Theses, and what those are just statements to his bishop at the time. So he's a monk, so he has someone above him, and he protests the selling of indulgences. Okay, so that word protest is going to be important because where we get the word Protestant is from protest. Okay, so protest comes from there, that word there. Okay, so the 95 Theses are written in 1517. The main idea is that God intended believers to seek repentance, which means asking for forgiveness, right? And that faith alone and not deeds would lead to salvation. So having faith, seeking out help and forgiveness from God himself will be the reason why you get in heaven, not for paying things or, hey, guess what? I was really nice. I went down there and helped someone out. That's not just what's going to get you where you need to be. That's salvation. That those 95 Theses were a direct criticism of the indulgences and kept on going talking about these things. He lived in Germany. This document just catches fire, and the printing press is starting to take form here. So we're starting to see that happening. And so the document spread out very quickly. And by 1518, not even a year later, Luther is called a heretic, which means a person that's against something or they're being opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. And he's condemned by the Pope himself. And the Pope's in charge of the Catholic Church, right? He's at the very, very top of those things. This starts Luther saying, you know what? I'm going to start my own church. And that's where we get to the Protestant Reformation. So reforming church is where we're getting with that. So Luther is the spark of those things. So we had Catholicism. That was all of those happening at that time. Luther felt about these indulgences, says, no, I ain't doing that. Writes 95 Theses, is kicked out pretty much of the Catholic faith, and he says, you know what, I'm going to start my own. So you might know someone that might be a Lutheran faith, right? A denomination of a Protestant religion. If you're a Baptist, if you're a Presbyterian, you're a Methodist, Anglican, which we'll talk about here in a second, all of those things are part of the Protestant Reformation, right? So protest against the Catholic Church is what we get with the Protestant Reformation. So reforming how we do those things. There's other guys also around Europe that decides, hey, I think I'm going to do what Luther is doing and start my own denomination as well. You have Calvinism, which was happening in Switzerland. He was another leader during this time. He created what we call consistory, which was a giant church court system, and would deal a lot with marriages, which is going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about here. Probably the most interesting character in the Reformation here in a second, but dealing with marriages and getting rid of marriages, those kind of things, which were not allowed in the Catholic Church. So that's Calvinism is kind of the same thing as Lutheran, broke away from the Catholic Church, started their own denomination. Then you have this thing called Anglicanism. Okay, Anglicanism is another denomination. It's a exact copy of Catholicism. It's just Catholic Church, but a different type of person that's ahead of the church. So let's talk about the guy that created this church here. Okay, it's this dude right here, King Henry VIII. Now, this is probably one of the most interesting characters during this time period. He is a king of England, and some more background about him. He was wanting a male heir. At that time, the females were not allowed to, were not thought of to be as powerful as a king. They're there to celebrate and help any way they can, but they couldn't be the head of their country. So let's lead this down this huge rabbit hole of King Henry VIII and why he had, as we notice on the screen, 6 wives. He has 6 wives. And it all comes through him trying to understand if he wants a male heir. So let's talk about it real quick before we get to all the crazy stuff why his country decided to break away from the Catholic Church. So he's a king of England, right? They are devout Catholics. All of them are there. He wants a male heir. His first wife is Catherine of Aragon. Okay? She is a widow, actually, of his brother. So his brother is actually king. He becomes into the throne. He marries Catherine of Aragon. Right? So the big thing is he wants a male heir. I have to have a male heir. I have to have this happen. Okay? So Catherine does not give him a male heir. She's getting a little bit older. So having kids is a little bit tougher for her. And he decides, you know what? I got to have a male heir. I'm going to get a divorce. Well, in the Catholic faith, divorce is pretty much a no-no. Okay? Having a divorce is not a good thing to have in the Catholic Church at this time. So what happens is that you have to get permission. And who do you ask permission from? If you're a king, you ask the Pope. The Pope is the head of the Catholic Church. So he goes, asks the Pope, says, hey, I need to have an heir to the throne. I need to have a male heir. Catherine is not giving it to me. I need to annul my marriage, which means dissolve, right? Pope says, no, that's stupid. You're fine. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing crazy happening in this marriage that warrants a divorce, so you can't do it. So King Henry says, you know what? I'm just going to become the head of the church. So he takes his entire country of England, pulls it out of the Catholic faith, and creates the Church of England. That's what he creates. Another name for that is Anglicanism, which is going to be important to understand because Anglicanism, it's always a hard word to say for some reason. Anglicanism is one of the denominations that starts to travel over to the New World. Okay, so when we get to the Age of Exploration, we're talking about our first colonies. Those Anglican people are the ones that start to travel over to the New World. Okay, so he becomes the head of the church. He becomes the head of the Church of England or Anglican Church. And he decides, all right, now I can divorce my wife because guess what? I'm the head of the church. I can decide what I want to do. So he gets rid of her. They actually have a daughter together. Her name is Mary, which is going to play a big role here later on in history. So Mary is there. She's very devout Catholic. She stays remaining Catholic the entire time. And he goes to his next wife, which is Anne Boleyn, which is probably one of the more well-known wives of King Henry VIII. The reason why she's probably the most famously known is because she's the first one he beheads. He actually executes her. And I'll talk about that here in a reason. So because of her and him remarrying to Anne Boleyn, this sparks the Reformation in England, right? So everyone starts to become Church of England. You still have some divide there between people. She was a Protestant person, so she believed that people should be able to read the Bible on their own, which is another Catholic thing that you weren't allowed to do. But then she is beheaded because of adultery and treason. Adultery is like if you're cheating on somebody, right? So that's what it is. And treason is going against the king. So if you're cheating on your husband and he's the king, it's probably going to be treason too. So he has her executed. She's beheaded. They have a daughter. Her name is Elizabeth. And which is going to be playing a role in history as well. When we get a little bit further and we talk about the Spanish Armada and things like that. His third wife is Jane Seymour. And this is, and we want to have big bell like ding, 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 ding. This is the one that gives him his son. He finally has a son. It's King Edward VI. Has him, finally has a male heir. He's happy. He's like, yes, I can't wait. But then because of complications, Jane actually passes away several weeks after she gives birth to Edward. So he does get a son, but unfortunately, his third wife passes away due to complications giving birth. So he goes, next thing, which is the more interesting one to me, is Anne of Cleves. He's married to her for just 6 months, and this is one of the most crazy things ever. So this was, he was going to war with France, I believe, and he wanted to have Germany as a ally. So the Duke of Cleves, which is the head in Germany, says, you can marry one of my sisters, I believe is what it is. And he goes, all right. He looks at 2 photos. He picks one. She comes in, and he does not think she's very attractive. He's like, actually, her nickname is the ugly wife, which is kind of bad if you think about those things, right? So it was a strategic marriage. He doesn't have anything to do with her. He doesn't care. And 6 months later, they get a divorce, and she is known as the king's sister, is what they call her. And so that's kind of bizarre. So that's Anna Cleese. The 5th wife is Catherine Howard. She is 19 years old at the time that they get married. He is much older. He's not the same King Henry he was back when he was married to Catherine of Aragon, which is the first Catherine. So she is 19 years old, and she starts to do things like cheat on him and commit adultery and things like that, and doesn't really care about it. And he actually beheads her as well. So there's 2 beheadings through the 6 wives. You have Anne Boleyn, you have Catherine Howard as well. His 6th and final wife is Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr is important because she decides to convince King Henry VIII to make sure that Mary and Elizabeth, remember, Mary was King Henry's and Catherine of Aragon's daughter, and then Elizabeth was King Henry's and Anne Boleyn's daughter. She says, hey, they should still be in the line of succession to get the throne. Edward is first because he's a male heir, but after that, you need to have a line of succession. So it went to King Edward, Princess Mary, and then Princess Elizabeth. So those are the heir succession line there. So all that to say that he split away from the Catholic Church and created his own Protestant church because he wasn't allowed to get a divorce. So he does have a son. When he passes away, he actually passes away a year before his 6th wife, Catherine Parr, does. And Edward comes into the throne, and he lasts to about 15 years old, and he actually dies. So he's 15 years old. He dies. That's when Mary becomes Queen of England, and we get a whole lot of crazy stuff there, which we'll talk about a little bit later on with them. Okay, so that is Reformation and Protestantism and religion. All those things got together. So just to wrap up real quick, Catholicism was the main form of religion in Europe. Martin Luther, who was a lawyer, becomes a monk after a lightning storm. Figures out about these things called indulgences, which were ways people paid to get into heaven. He thought that was not the right way to do things, and so he decides to write the 95 Theses that when he criticizes the Catholic Church, everyone that's Catholic faith goes against him, especially the higher-ups and the Pope. He's called a heretic. He breaks away in protest, which is where we get the word Protestant from, away from the Catholic Church, creates Lutheranism. Other people do this as well, breaking away from church, which starts the Protestant Reformation. Then you have King Henry VIII, who does it for selfish reasons, right? Creates it, but he does create a Protestant religion in with the Church of England, or Anglicanism. Okay, so there is your presentation over religion and Reformation. We have other things, quick hitters over the Reformation as well. Just go on our website and look at all those good things. All right, guys, I'll see you later.